Okay, cool. So I was thinking in terms of time, maybe I could have like a half hour. We have a half hour, and then we have more of a conversation.
Sure.
My glasses.
Is that
So when we start, just can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Christine Snyder. I'm the managing editor at the Spirit of Jefferson in Charlestown.
Great. And I'm gonna, more. I'm probably gonna ask more, biographical questions later, but I wanted to just make sure we got through some of the topics that I know are interesting to me and to the community of the CCAR. So this is the presentation we gave for Senator Manchin with a few changes. Mm-hmm. So there was, I added who the delegation was. And I'll send this to you later, because I think what's important is just how many experts we have in the area, like Jim Cummins, who is the chief biologist at the Potomac River Basin Commission, which protects all of DC's water. Catherine Figa, who's medical doctor, Billy Gard, the lawyer, Karen Glennon, Sean Amos, Catherine Joswick, and me. So that was the team. The main things I want to go through are, what our county is, and what's unique and valuable about it, and understand your thoughts and what you know about, some of the information. So, how would you characterize our county in terms of being more identified with Washington, D.C., with West Virginia? How does that work?
I mean, I grew up in Martinsburg. I remember when the Eastern Panhandle started to become the bedroom community for DC. We've always been so far removed from our state capital. It's only natural that we would be more aligned with DC than Charleston. So yeah, I've always known that.
And did you notice sort of what happened with Frederick over time?
Sure.
It started as a bedroom community for Montgomery County. Then you have people need amenities like restaurants and shops and all that, and then all of a sudden companies are putting headquarters there and biotech facilities and everything else. So,
right.
To me, when we were talking to Senator Manchin, one of the key points was we can keep moving in that direction, and everyone's really shown that the direction of industrialization, the only thing that can go next to industrial sites is more industrial sites. Like, literally, people don't want to live next to industrial sites or be near them. So the economy, I mean, we have, 3.2% unemployment. Our wages are average less than the United States, but better than Berkeley, Morgan, and the West Virginia average. And Rockwool could have a negative economic impact. And the rest of the world, I took this from a study which showed the effects of pollution in markets. This is all about taking really polluted places and how do you clean them up. So when you clean them up, and so it was just interesting, health expenditures, labor productivity, agricultural yields are directly affected. Those are market costs. Non-market costs are disutility because of illness and mortality. So it was just interesting if most of the world is focusing on making sure pollution moves out of their markets, their economy can grow. It just seemed interesting to me that we're even considering adding a major polluter to our market. And these are currently the sectors. So we only have 5% manufacturing. And that's, and this is the Panhandle as a whole. So, you know, obviously Jefferson County has, and I'll send this to you. So one example was that I just pulled was the equine industry.
We, in the Spirit, ran a column from Dr. Weimer early on in this, so I remember.
Great. So you're familiar with these materials, yeah. Great. Okay, and I think that one of the key points that she makes here that I just wanted to bring out is that if the equine industry was a business, it would have way, way more power than a Rockwool, right? But because it's a whole bunch of small business owners, you know, they don't have the same. And Loudoun County has much more of a, you know, equine. So this was interesting. You know, the pollutants in the Byhalia, Mississippi plant, 532,000 pounds. Jefferson background, 218 pounds. And there's a lot of discussion of these. Unfortunately, I'm not a chemist or a biologist, so, you know, but it was fascinating when the experts were talking about just how much that is. You know, I mean, in this case, you know, 200 ox paperboard companies. You know, if it was Mississippi, what they're permitted for here for phase 1 is 100 paperboard companies. You know, and it's, I mean, that's like an enormous amount. So you're familiar with the pollutants because you do those. Now, one thing that's interesting is in the models, like if you drive down 230 in you know, a fall evening, you'll see all of the clouds just across the valley. Like, sky is perfectly clear, clouds are all sitting there. That's because of the temperature inversion. So, and in London, a temperature inversion killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. You know, and so one of, I think, the concerns of the group is how minimized the real impact could be, because all you need is these chemicals. I mean, it's running 24 hours a day, you know, comes up, it settles, you know, the kids are having a soccer game and, you know, they're effectively poisoned. So, I mean, this is a huge risk, specific to our area. The other thing that happens is the airborne pollutants wind up in our water supply. You know, it's not just groundwater contamination. I'm sure you've seen this chart many times, but there's one I want to show you. I thought this was...
I mean, you can send it to me later.
Yeah. Actually, I do know... Well, so I have a picture that shows all of West Virginia, the different geography. Jefferson County is the only one that has this geography,
right.
So, geology, right? So it's bright yellow on this chart. Everything else is different. Now within that, they pick this spot that is literally the most likely in the entire state to have this type of geology. And without really understanding the geology, the aquifers, and the biology of the situation, it's really hard to understand just what a big threat that is. Well, there's this area, the reason they called it the Arabian Plain is that the settlers would come across here, and like everywhere else, they would see water. There would be streams where their horses could drink. Through here, they couldn't drink anything. It was like desert. It's because all the water was underground. That's where the distribution is. So when there's a chemical spill, like near Charleston, West Virginia, they can go to the water, and there are all kinds of ways to clean it up. Chemicals you can have, whatever. Here, it goes underground, and the entire distribution is underground. So even with a small spill, there's literally no way to clean it up. And not only that, there's no way for people to even know. Like, it's all of a sudden in your drinking water. You know, and 80% of the people here on wells. So, you know, you look at this and, I mean, Shepherdstown and Steamboat Run are reasonably freaked out, right? I mean, it's, you know, from here, this distribution underground is, you know, health concerns. I really hope you talk to Catherine Figure, because it's hard to understand what you mean by a risk without talking to a physician. So if they say, well, there's a risk of X, you know, from this toxins, you know, whatever percent, whatever probability, any risk. It's that people don't know. So when you have a population, what would it mean to have even a small increase in premature births, like a tiny increase in premature births? Here, there's the closest hospital to get to if you have a premature birth is Ruger Memorial Hospital. That's where they medevac people to, particularly with premature birth. They don't have the facilities at either of these institutions. So the likelihood of survival goes way down. Ned Marshall had lung replacement surgery because of silicosis. He's been on his property for 250 years. If this plant is built, there's a very, very good chance that he will die. Now, let's just say 5 people get lung disease because of this. What we're saying is, you know, or people decide not to run, you know, go running on the trails and all those types of things, because there's a risk. Now, we had at Geo Stellar, we had a customer who was an agent at Creative Artists Agency, and I talked to him about why he went solar, and he said, well, I was playing, you know, I play tennis all the time, and I started getting bronchitis often. And he said, you know, I realized my doctor told me I shouldn't be playing tennis during certain times of day and during certain days. And I realized that every time I drove, I was contributing to that problem. So here, people are actually going to be, who play tennis and soccer and football, they're going to be noticing impacts. And most of those people moved out here not for those impacts. So the interesting thing is, you know, when you hear, and it's such incredible bad faith for them to say, well, there's as much, you know, airborne particles from gravel roads as there is here. There's an enormous difference between a totally dispersed, distributed, you know, amount of pollutants and a point source pollutant. They're completely different things. It's like saying, well, my car is only a tiny fraction of all the the emissions in Jefferson County, but you don't sit in your garage with your car running. Like, that is literally the difference. Like, that's the analogy. And so what's so difficult for everybody to understand is people say these are within EPA guidelines, but the EPA guidelines are they're negotiated, right? It's so that you can't say, okay, well, we've definitely, you know, we've constructed this thing, and we know we're going to poison everybody, right? So all it means is, what medicine knows is there's a substantially increased risk. So within 35 miles, it's significant impact. So 700 towns are within significant impact from cancer, lung disease, premature delivery, low birth weight, kidney disease, etc. So the questionable practices have all really been minimized, and that's the thing that I really, you know, you can call what I stated hyperbole, but that's actually arguable.
Okay.
Because for example, spot zoning, when you have a zoning plan and it says we have a limit of 90 feet except for these specific things, silos and whatever. There were a specific number of things, okay? When you change a zoning rule because of a project, you're engaging in two illegal practices: contract zoning and spot zoning, okay? So, and it's on the record that that's what they did, okay? There's no ambiguity. If those meetings recording, they committed an illegal act, then just imagine what's going on when they weren't actually being recorded, right? So, from Charleston, okay, you have the WVDO working, the West Virginia Development Office, working with the Jefferson County Development Authority, working with a local town. You had a plan that was approved and funded by the EPA, HUD, and Department of Transportation. Okay, those three agencies, if you call the town of Ransom, they'll still tell you that that project is on track, right? They have to. It's like, okay, well, we're using this site, but then in the contract, you can't actually use the rest of the site for what it was supposed to be for. Now, we know that that population is that population is that the federal government, as part of the Trump rolling back absolutely everything, the Obama legacy. Smart cities was part of the Obama legacy. Can you imagine the Trump administration, Department of Transportation, HUD under, what's his name, Ben Carson, right? The EPA under originally Scott, whatever his name is, now an even worse kleptocrat, right? Those people supporting this project, and instead having Trump, Wilbur Ross, Steve Manchin, all witnessing the signature of a pact between China Energy and Woody Thrasher, okay? They're all there, okay? Our two senators are supporting that, right? China Energy is investing in gas and coal, distribution of gas and coal, and consumption of gas and coal, right? So there was very literally a coordinated plan to find producers and consumers, right? Woody Thrasher is also the CEO of the engineering firm on record for this project, right? So it's not like my statements are not only unreasonable. What my suggestion will be is that this is what Jefferson Spirit, like if you guys had covered it in the way that I did, like you would have had the story of a lifetime. You would, and I mean, obviously there's still time. You know, you and Rob could be on 60 Minutes talking about breaking these stories, how critical these issues are in your backyard. Like what is really going on? That's what, and it's, you know, journalism covering these meetings, watching the videos of these meetings, understand what's happening, the impacts of the community. So spot zoning was a big one. The air assessment, dozens of issues, and I'm going to go through one of those. The conflicts of interest, which we talked about. I mean, Joy and Eric Lewis. Joy literally, you know, moving Nick Deal from here to here, Joy moving from here to here, in terms of, you know, just FOIAing the information and saying, did Joy get a raise? It's a reasonable question. A board member of JCDA said to me that Eric Lewis was pressuring him to hire Nick Deal. He said that to me. Now he totally denies it, but there was no reason for him to deny it. We were just driving to a meeting together, and he was bitching about the fact that, you know, there wasn't a consideration of any other candidates, and, you know, he was just bitching to me, right? So I know that's going on. That was the truth, okay? So if I had been a journalist, obviously I would have said this on the record, and, you know, but those are the kinds of things we need to really look at. So the lawsuit of the JCDA as a utility, improperly composed and managed, lack of disclosures to members, threats of personal liability, like those, there are whistleblowers who are coming to JCDA from inside and saying, hey, you know, I'm concerned about these practices. They're sharing things. These are all going to come out in these court cases. That would be fascinating to readers. Like those interviews with the Jefferson Vision. And there's certain things that they're not going to tell you because it's part of their proprietary. But to be an outlet where they feel like they trust you to publish the unvarnished truth about what they're discovering would be incredibly powerful, instead of, you know, feeling, okay, I have to go to Charleston Gazette, because they have reporters who are used to going up and really understanding the conflicts between mining interests and industrial interests in communities. And that's what those reporters do every day.
I mean, I worked at the Charleston Gazette. I worked
Awesome.
with Ken Ward, so I'm not, I mean...
I was going to ask you about your background too, so we can go into that.
I just mentioned that. I mean, I would say that was one of the things that led me to question in the column and go into the whole explanation about this legal ad being the week of Thanksgiving. That reporter from the Gazette took that as an absolute truth, that there was this effort to hide the legal ad by running it the week of Thanksgiving. And she didn't ask me about that.
So I didn't read that quote. I mean, a lot of people are saying, hey Lori, how's it going? A lot of people are saying the reason, one of the reasons people didn't know about it and is because it was published the day before Thanksgiving. And to me, that's a reasonable, that's a reasonable thesis for why some people didn't know about it, or why a lot of people didn't know about it. So I think, one of the points that I made in our Facebook dialogue is, if you were aware, you guys, if you were aware of of this thing happening, and there was this legal notice, I'm curious, was there any dialogue of, hey, maybe we should do a story about this? Was there any conversation about that?
When I went back and looked at the week that the legal ad ran, this big story that I wrote that week was about the 4 people who died of carbon monoxide poisoning in Carneysville because their heat had been turned off. The family, tracking them down, talking to them about it. I mean, the Spirit has, right now, 3 editorial people who have to put out the paper every week. And at that time, it was Rob and me and some freelancers. So, I feel like there are all kinds of things that could have been done differently with this. One of the points I made in the column, Dale Manuel always called for public hearings on anything and everything. If he had been on the commission, he would have had this discussion in public early on. It would have been great if the Spirit and the Gazette and the Washington Post had all been writing and looking into all this stuff starting, last November. But that did not happen.
Yeah, so that's another really interesting point about Dale Manuel not being on the commission. This was the board, the Jefferson County Commission. I mean, there was an absolute wave election like West Virginia's never seen. in any other election, Dale Manuel had a really good chance of winning, right? So to me, that's another way, that's another reason, legitimate reason to be able to claim or state with, it's a valid assumption to say that this project probably would not be on the table for Jefferson County if there hadn't been a Trump wave election, right? I mean, that's a reasonable assumption. And to me, that's an interesting story, an interesting part of the story. So I'm still, and it wasn't the timing, et cetera, and the Post still isn't writing about this. I mean, it's still not on the radar. So to me, seeing it, like, and so Dale Manuel has one set of responsibilities. The rest of the Jefferson County Commission, when they're on the commission, have a certain set of responsibilities. Like, who are they paying attention to certain things or not? The press has a different level of responsibility. So it does, and I'm just, this isn't to put you on the spot, but it's really to hopefully try and improve what things are. I really just want to know, was there any conversation when you saw this? When was the first time when you actually thought this was a real story that you should start covering?
This happens all the time where somebody in a group comes to us and says, you really should be looking at this. And in this case, when Regina Hendricks and the Sierra Club started raising questions, we started writing stories. If the Sierra Club or anybody had raised questions in November or January or February or March, we would have started writing stories then. There's, you can place blame all over the place. The voters elected Josh Compton over Dale Manuel. That's not a Trump conspiracy so much as voters saying, we don't want somebody who has 2 terms under his belt and has been a state lawmaker and knows all the ins and outs. We want a brand new person who hasn't really been paying attention to Jefferson County or Jefferson County politics. And they put him in that role. And he didn't call for a public hearing. Jane Tabb went to the Rockwool plant in Mississippi and came back and felt like it was a good development for Jefferson County at that time. She didn't raise any questions. You can say the Spirit should have done more, and I would love for the Spirit to have been able to do, all these great story ideas. But the reality is, people in our community, a lot of them don't read any news at all. They certainly don't support the Spirit with subscriptions or ads. If they did, we would be able to be a much bigger news organization.
Right. And I'm not worried about that. I mean, to me, this is interesting and important, and I think it's important for people to understand that how important their voice is, and how important the Sierra Club bringing this is. Because then, people can say, okay, well, that's great. It's really good that we have these citizen advocacy organizations. Now, going forward, I think the question is, and it's a very fair question, is what you're covering and how you're covering. So the decision to do 2 full interviews with Rockwool executives, publishing something that is kind of an advertorial, it's hard to tell.
It's not an advertorial.
Okay, so what was that thing about them being a green company and being recognized? Was that a pure advertisement?
I'm not sure what you're...
I wish I had brought the copies of the paper that I'm talking about. But,
they haven't run any advertorials at all, so I can say that as a link. They've purchased ads, and we did a Q&A with them where we asked them hard questions. So I don't think
some of the ads.
There's an online ad that refers to the DEP statement that I think some people have been confused about. And on our website, that spot is always an ad and not editorial. But and there's a Rockwool logo on it. But some people have been confused and thought that was a news story.
Well, and Rob Snyder's your husband, right? Okay. He is a journalist and he's director of advertising.
He is, he's the publisher, but not the owner. He has a salary. He accepts advertising. In other words, he's the person that somebody says, I want to place an ad, and he finds the
His
spot
title
for
is
it.
something like director of ad.
Our advertising director left, and Rob moved into that role. But he doesn't get a commission from any ads. So Rockwool could be buying, a full page every single week, and it wouldn't impact our family finances in the slightest. Rockwool had bought some ads. I'm not sure. It was in the winter after the November legal ad ran. They bought a full page ad saying, "Here we are in Jefferson County now." And nonetheless, when all this started, we did start asking questions about Rockwool, and we had the Q&A where we asked them hard questions. So I've heard a lot of people.
You think, Karen, you asked them hard questions?
Yes. And Tim Cook, Tim and Rob were there. I wasn't. But yes, they wanted to get the Rockwool folks on the record because people hadn't gone to the open house. So here's some information that people wanted to ask and know about the air quality monitors, how that would work, and so we felt like it was important to give this space to show this conversation, and we have asked Chris Kinnan to do something similar, and we haven't heard back about that. I was shocked when I heard that described as an ad for Rockwool because we did not see it that way.
I didn't see that as an ad, but it was, the idea that they have information that is more valid than, for example, the people who, like Jim Cummins and Christine Figa and all that.
I would not say they have that.
But still, the argument that there was an open house and people didn't go, so we're going to now basically publish the information that they wanted to do. There's another thing I'll send to you. There's a great document that people shared about the phases of how industrial polluters, it's called From Silent Spring Somewhere, what they do to get these projects done that are immensely destructive for the communities. And part of that is co-opting the press, and here's how you do it. And it's all laid out. So people are more concerned of how vigilant is our local press? How much, it's much easier for a small, struggling local newspaper to be compromised than it is for the Washington Post with Jeff Bezos or Politico or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it comes across to everybody like, well, Rockwool's saying nobody came and listened to us, so Jefferson Spirit's going to be our mouthpiece. Like, that's literally what, and you reaffirm that. It's like you had to publish their information because people didn't show up. Well, people didn't show up because we already knew that they were providing false information.
I mean, I guess it all goes back to, if you believe that Rockwool is a toxic company that is lying, then that information isn't helpful.
No, but that's all it is. So a toxic company, they emit toxins, EPA regulated toxins. You can look that up. You can see how much they pollute, okay? It's not up for, they say things like, and I have screen captured this, I'm happy to send them to you. I think it would be a great story. He's saying to Butch Deal, you're going to be disappointed when you find that what we release is cleaner than the background air, right? So you can say, if you believe they're a lying company, okay, well, I have a statement, and Richard's response was awesome. He said, okay, well, the FDA has a limit for the amount of rat droppings you can put in food, or that can be in food. Does that mean you want to add rat droppings? It's not that the rat droppings are cleaner than the food.
Right.
Like, you can't say that.
Right.
So that's those are the things that need to be challenged.
Well, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with what we've written about on Rockwool so far, but we are and have challenged them. We are not the mouthpiece of Rockwool. We do not want to be. We're not accepting money to become the mouthpiece of Rockwool. In the same issue last week, there's a story about what's going on with the city council. There's a story about the DEP fining them. There's a column from a woman who went to the Climate Week.
So are you familiar with Talbot's tour of Jefferson County with Rockwool?
I don't know. What are you talking about?
So are you familiar with the Italian lady who spoke at the JCDA meeting? Okay. So
I mean, one thing I should say too, going back to, the Spirit is a small newspaper.
Right.
My job is not even to be a reporter.
Right.
My job is getting the paper out every week. I'm editing. I do sometimes write. Going back to your questions about Rob, he takes photos. He ends up, doing interviews sometimes. We all end up doing Rob delivers the papers sometimes. We all end up doing all kinds of things, but day-to-day news coverage, I typically don't go to JCDA meetings, so I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so what I consider one of the most offensive presentations I've ever seen. So she said she had an Italian accent, she lives in Denmark.
You're talking about just this
past JCDA meeting, okay? She gets up there and says, people say that there's no poor people in Jefferson County. Well, I just toured Jefferson County and I saw poor people. So first she sets up a straw man, which is a rhetorical device. No one said that there were no poor people. Obviously we know poor people. A lot of our friends are poor. I mean, it's not like, and she says, basically this whole story about how because they're a green company and they help insulate, they're going to help poor people and they can give money to poor people and all that. So if you're leaving a trailer, you're not going to use Rockwool expensive, insulation, right? You're not like the communities that are most impacted, like North Jefferson Elementary, are the ones with the kids who are most vulnerable, right, economically. So in terms of, again, reporting, and I was wondering how she knew, how she toured Jefferson County, what she saw who. Well, it turns out she toured with Talbot, right, who's African American, okay?
And a big advocate for the poor. I mean, he's
exactly,
always talked about that.
Exactly. And so she, on this tour, I would be very interested to understand how he feels about those statements and have coverage. And again, you don't have a deep bench, but what we're going to get to is, because these things are so critically important, and because you have a multi-billion-dollar international company with PR people and spin and all this stuff, it's a legitimate concern of the citizens that you're hearing one side of the story and you're covering one side of the story. Like Nick Deal's comment on hysteria, right? Even putting it on scare quotes in that whole thing. Like, instead of even writing critically about the root of the term hysteria and how much it's used to silence women, because it's the same hysterectomy. Like, only women could be hysterical. Like, it's reasonable to counter on any time there's an article like that, to call someone, whoever your contact, your sources are, right? And building that source network, and ask for example, Women's March. When this article comes out, how do you feel about Nick Deal calling these protesters hysterical? Maybe the headline would have been, Nick Deal blasted for calling, for downplaying the concerns of citizens. Like, there are a million ways that this could be covered, and it's a legitimate concern of Jefferson County citizens.
But I see what you're saying. What I see is, one of the things that we do all the time, have always done in the years we've been here, since 2012, is to give people space on our editorial page for their points of view. That's what we did with Dr. Weimer. I may not have time that week to go out and do a story about her concerns, but I can give her the space in our paper to tell her story. We do that all the time. So
that's what I'm asking. It's within the story. Like, if you're going to publish a story, why publish the story uncritically?
It wasn't uncritically. I mean, I feel like the reaction that I've gotten to this column, there is a very low threshold for anything that people don't want to hear, and that's. If you had written the story differently, then people wouldn't have that reaction. I have gotten emails from people saying, if you don't start being anti-Rockwool.
Okay, that's fine, but that's still a fringe thing. I mean, seriously, so I understand that's a mob approach. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the responsibility of the free press and the paper of record. In that
Nick Deal story, I did talk to somebody from Jefferson County Vision. I did not ask them about Nick Deal's quote about hysteria. I know the root of the word. I don't consider it sexist. I was trying to find out, what word would have been okay to use to convey what Nick Deal was saying, that there is an overinflated people are saying that if this plant opens, Jefferson County will not be a place that they can be able to live anymore.
And after this, okay, and this is only a small part, do you personally feel that is overinflated, that concern?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. And I would
Why?
say...
Why are you not concerned with a massively polluting plant that spews incredibly toxic chemicals so close to on a very vulnerable water supply? Why does that? Do you consider that inflated?
I mean, it's lots of things, and I think that was the point I was trying to make in my column. When you have so many people and they're saying all kinds of things that I know aren't true. From people out saying Nick Deal gets a percentage of the projects that he brings in, so he made money from Rockwool.
Right, but you're a reporter, so you can easily...
Right.
You can get rid of those, I understand.
Okay, so my point is the hysteria part of it.
I know, but I'm not doing that. I'm asking you why you feel that those concerns aren't legitimate, and why you don't feel that this is a genuine threat to the county in terms of the economy, the environment, and the health of the citizens.
I'm not saying that you don't have legitimate concerns.
No, but why don't you feel personally? Why don't you have a genuine concern for the county and your family and your property values because of this? Not as a reporter, as a private citizen. Why are you not concerned?
Because life has gone on in Byhalia, Mississippi, and Milton, Ontario.
But you think those are... So you think, after all we've talked about, you think Jefferson County is like Milton, Ontario, and Byhalia, Mississippi?
Again,
have you studied their economy and their environment?
I am not an expert on their economy and their environment, but I I feel like there is this element, and I think that's why Nick Deal used the term hysteria. And I think it detracts from the arguments that people opposed to Rockwool make when it is presented as this is going to destroy life as we know it in Jefferson County. I feel.
What if it's true? What if there's only a 5% chance that it's true?
I think that's.
Do you want to be in the movie, right? The documentary about how Jefferson County was destroyed, or do you want to be in the movie about how a group of citizens who loved their county so much prevented a potential, even if there's a small chance, the fact that because of these specific chemicals, remember the EPA, they consider it confidential information, what they actually have on site and what they use to melt these rocks, right? So the potential is real, right?
Yes.
It happens all through West Virginia, okay? The potential for destruction here is greater than Byhalia, Mississippi, when there aren't people within 8.9 miles or whatever it is, right? So the concept of not in my backyard means literally, in this case, it shouldn't be in anybody's backyard, right? It should be in places where we know it's going to be more dispersed, right? So the concern, like when I spoke before the Board of Education, I was crying. When this comes up, it's emotional, right? I do not have a uterus, okay? I am not hysterical. I am deeply emotional, okay? Because I know how vulnerable, how different. We moved here because we knew Bradley Sanders, who's sitting right over there. I worked for him in Washington, D.C. I came out on a bus on this Winnebago with him, and I got to know the area, and I loved it, and I brought my family here. We are not hysterical. People who are not reporters say things that are wrong. Misinformation gets propagated. By making that the issue, you are literally doing what is happening here. It's working. Like the levels of secrecy and getting you that information, the online bullying and intimidation, it's moving. Like, do you understand do you know the definition of an ad hominem attack?
I do, and that
what is an ad hominem? What is the ad hominem fallacy?
Focusing on the character rather than the argument. And what I was saying is, what in my
it's
column,
not the character. It's talking about the person, right?
Okay,
it's the
person,
straw
the
man.
character.
It's the ad hominem fallacy. Okay, there's a fallacy where you say, okay, there's an argument this person made. To counter that argument, I'm going to mention or talk about the person. That is what the definition of ad hominem.
But my mentioning the things that are in your background was to buttress this idea that you are not the most reliable person to be
exactly. That is, you've just stated the ad hominem fallacy.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what you said shouldn't be taken at face value, because in all these business dealings, you have a track record for telling people one thing and not following through. So they should not trust your blanket statement without anything backing it up. That was my point.
Okay, and you just, once again, you reiterated the ad hominem fallacy. Now, what you could have done is said, okay, David made these claims, right? What about those claims is incorrect? And then it wouldn't have been an ad hominem fallacy. Now, you brought up other things, so I want you on the record to tell me what business dealings you felt were not legitimate.
I wouldn't say your business dealings aren't legitimate. I'm saying there are all kinds of things in the different businesses.
So tell me what those things are.
Well, so one of them that came to my mind is, hiring someone for a job, telling them when they're worried about, is this job going to be here for me? I don't want to give up my safe job in order to come work for you. And you saying you can have this job for as long as you want it. And then that person is told a week and a half, 2 weeks later, that there's no salary for their job. The situation in Ann Arbor obviously raises a lot of questions. How is it that money that was paid for people's down payments on a project, that money wasn't available when the projects were going to be installed?
And when did you hear about these things?
I have known about some of these things for 20 years. So
why didn't, in all of this, why have you never said, I'm going to interview
I'll tell you
David
why.
Levine and
I will tell you why, and you can clear up something for me on the record. So when you talk about an alternative JCDA or a syndicate that would buy the Rockwool property from Rockwool, how are you in the mix with that? Would in your company be helping that happen and get money from?
You haven't answered my question.
No, you asked why? Because
Yes.
because I have no time or desire to do an expose on David Levine.
Right, but why would you? If the New York Times, felt it was interesting or legitimate to cover the Geo Stellar's program with what are the companies? Kimberly-Clark, Cisco, Johnson & Johnson. It was in the New York Times.
Sure.
And at that point, you don't think, okay, local businessman doing okay? Like that's not a reasonable story?
There are so many great stories in Jefferson County that I want to get to that I don't get to, and I've heard many people tell me that describe you as brilliant, and that the Geo Stellar idea was a terrific idea. But what my question is, in this mix
right now I'm
Rockwool,
interviewing you. You can interview me afterwards. Seriously, that's what we said. Right now we're talking about this.
You said you wanted to make a presentation to me.
No, I said the first period of time I'm talking to you, and then you can interview me.
What time is it? How long have you been talking to me?
Okay, I've gone over time. So let me just wrap this up. Make sure we've gotten this. So and I will send this to you in terms of things. So the false and misleading claims and minimizations have started to clean in the air. No areas have had complaints. We've seen many. We're getting, I spelled Wales wrong, but we're getting information from lots of places. Lots of risk hazards, the impact on economically disadvantaged communities. In the air assessment, they're supposed to do a year, right? And they're not, okay? Here,
yes, and I think Brunswick maybe just this week.
Right. So there are groups. We have this. Obviously, they say, well, no one can market it. Well, what is the demand? Like one person I would really recommend that you actually interview is Melissa Hines, who is who lives in Charlestown. She sees the pressure on Round Hill for people wanting mixed-use zoned facilities, right? Everybody wants that. They want places to build. What was Risen Weber doing? How did he market this? How did he not market this? To me, those are very interesting things to cover.
Oh, I agree.
Okay, so then there's ways we're working with them. Again, I'll send you this. I will send you, we didn't go through them, but I have an enormous list, and I'll just tag you on it. I mean, I think it would be interesting on CCAR for you to just say which of those things you'd be interested in or not. I mean, it's good. There are all these citizens who said, we would like to see this covered.
I mean, I'll tell you, I am very happy to see people engaged in their community, and I've always felt that it's a huge challenge in the Eastern Panhandle because the Journal, has no institutional memory. If you had had a newspaper like the Gazette in Martinsburg, our community would be very different. But you have never had a big news organization put in the resources to really cover the people and the government agencies and really do a thorough job of presenting news. So then people just check out from any local news, and then you don't have an informed citizenry, and that's a huge problem.
So you this is the one thing I just want to get. You feel that the concerns that Rockville could fundamentally change the character of Jefferson County, you feel those concerns are overblown?
I would just say that my feeling is and this was one of the responses to my column. Doesn't she care about the health of her kids? And I have 4 daughters.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, what parent wouldn't want their children to live in a place where the air is healthy, where there's clean water? And I feel like when people are presented with this idea of, do you care about the health of your children? And they say yes, then the people in the anti-Rockwool movement say, well, you have to come join our movement. It's the only way. How can you take that risk? And, I'm not sure I buy that. I feel like there's this push to push everybody into the anti-Rockwool camp, and I'm not pro-Rockwool. I wish that there had been a big conversation before any of this started, and people could have become engaged at that point.
Okay. And I agree, you shouldn't be, as the publisher of a paper, pro-Rockville or anti-Rockville, except where there is the purpose of the editorial section is to actually state the opinion and position of the paper. The Gray Lady does that, and you've done that too. And people are happy that you believe the plaque should be removed, and those things. Okay, so it is perfectly legitimate for citizens to say, we really hope that the Spirit of Jefferson actually comes out in the editorial page against Rockville. Okay, so that is reasonable.
Sure.
Now, I still haven't heard an answer to the question. So you said, of course, you're concerned about your children's health and all that.
Of course, I care about my children's health.
Right.
I care about the health of children generally.
Right, and you don't think that the amount of pollutants and the air, the way the air flows, and around here, and the way our water, the geology of our systems, and the distribution of water, you don't think that those are causes for alarm?
I don't think they are. I think it's absolutely good and necessary for the press and for citizens to be asking hard questions, and for this project to be put to all the scrutiny that it can be put to. I think that's completely a good idea, to make sure that it's safe. But the idea that people who aren't opposed to Rockwool don't care about people's health or don't care about their children's health.
No, I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that it's a question of ignorance, right? So, and that's why it's so important for, because this happened incredibly fast, right? So instead of taking a year to measure to monitor the air on site and understand where the wind was blowing in all these different directions, they picked places that were far away and then didn't do proper modeling, right? So there really is no way to know. Like there's very little knowledge about that.
Well,
so that increases the risk.
Okay, let me ask you the idea that that this happened in secret. You would say it happened in secret.
Oh, I mean, for a long time, the whole Project Shuttle, by definition, it was secret. And Eric Lewis was caught on video after it was supposedly announced, not saying what it was, like weeks afterwards, where people were pressing him.
How come?
So, by definition, yes.
Okay, but after it was announced, why do you think there was none of these questions were raised?
It wasn't until the open house that people...
groundbreaking.
The groundbreaking, I don't even know if people really noticed. Fortunately, it wasn't until we had, I think, really heroic local citizens who raised everyone's attention. For me, it was walking in here. You know, it was one night for soccer. I was just getting dinner, right? I was just getting dinner. Daisy's soccer practice, you know. I couldn't go for some reason. I don't remember why. There were 2 cars. There was some mix-up. I had to wait here for her to get back. It turned out, you know, Tracy was presenting to the Women's March. I just sat eating my dinner, and my jaw dropped when I started hearing some of the facts, the real facts that were coming out. And I said, holy crap. And I started doing more and more of my own research. When I argue with Eric Lewis, what I say is, look, I trust you to protect me. Like, going to Milton, Ontario and driving around and talking to happy people, that is not research. Jane Tabb going on a company junket, right, to Byhalia, Mississippi, that is not research. This is, and I say, I don't know who paid for it. I don't care who paid for it. It was all of this is controlled
but what would
by
it take?
Rockwool.
What would it take? Because I think that's the other side of the question you just asked me. You know, the pollutant level, what risk would you...
I can see it's too much.
Okay,
like,
but
I know, they've already said what they're...
Right. So
it's
the
not
company,
right.
there's nothing
that's going to get them here. They cannot be in Jefferson County. They should not be in Jefferson County.
There's nothing that company could say or do.
There's nothing a company could say or do because of science. Okay, because I'm crazy, not because we're hysterical.
Because of the karst geology and because of the
karst geology, because the way the wind blows and the amount of toxins and the things that still aren't disclosed, the things we don't know. So the more that's going to come out, the clearer it is.
Well, so at one point, and I didn't see this for myself, but somebody mentioned it to me, there was a discussion between you and Bjorn Anderson where you said, when you worked for the state, you worked for the Economic Development Office in Charleston, or you worked for...
Yeah, the Economic Development Authority.
Okay. So at one point you were talking to Bjorn Anderson and you said, I can help you find a good site for this plant. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
I have the screencaps.
I mean, I'm just saying, where would you put this plant?
I said, that's Deloitte's job. Okay, so there are 2 concepts. There's not my backyard. 3 concepts. Not my backyard, not in anybody's backyard, and not on planet Earth. Okay, so there are 3 categories, right? I think this goes under the category in not in anybody's backyard.
Not in anybody's backyard?
Correct. It needs to be in a place where it is not going to impact people. Hey, Billy.
Hi, how are you, Dan?
Good.
Talk to you later.
2.
It needs to be in a place where there are no
It is
people.
not where it's the likelihood of it impacting people is much, much lower, and that area is appropriately zoned and near. So we're switching now. Now you're interviewing me?
Oh, I'm
Okay.
just,
Yeah,
I mean,
sorry.
you've been providing me with information, kind of the same thing.
Okay.
And then the not on planet Earth.
And there's some things that shouldn't be here. What are those? I mean, I think coal plants shouldn't be on planet Earth because you don't need them. We have solar, we have wind. You don't need coal plants, right? So, those are the 3 categories of development.
Okay. Well, so let's say this conversation about, you could help Rockwool find a suitable place. You would have looked for another place in West Virginia that has different geology, away from schools and people.
For example, coalfield redevelopment. I mean, you have a place that's, it's kind of interesting. I remember one of the first conversations I had with Dave Satterfield, who used to be head of the Economic Development Authority, not Economic, the WVDO. He was executive director. We were just having this conversation. He was like, one of the problems with West Virginia is that there are too many mountains, right? There aren't enough flat spaces for amenities. That's freaking ridiculous, right? So the thing is, if you have places that are already destroyed, I could see there is a legitimate place. Now, politically, I think it would be very hard for the governor to say, okay, these activists that didn't want it there got it kicked out of the state. I know that there are...
I'm not sure I understand. It would be very hard for the governor...
For the governor politically...
To see it go to another state.
To see it go to another state, okay? With all of his, being an ally of Trump, etc.
Okay.
That's the only reason I think that there is a rationale for the people who are in charge of this to find a more appropriate spot within the state. Now, to me, I don't feel that there are any human beings who should be subject to this type of pollution. So again, if it's moved to another part of the state, I would still think that there need to be much more rigorous studies and controls, including 1 full year of on-site monitoring of the air. I mean, this was clearly rushed.
Well, how serious is the idea of buying the land from Rockville?
How serious is? So.
Or tell me
I want
about
to tell you the story.
Yeah, the story.
Okay.
So it's part of the JC alternative.
I'll just tell you the story. Okay. Make sense?
Sure.
Okay. So when when things were going wrong at Geo Stellar, okay, it was because we had secured creditors backed by Chris Bancroft, who I met. He sold the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones to Rupert Murdoch. Okay, they committed a certain amount of money in a certain path. The very month that we were going to Ann Arbor for the presentation, they didn't pay the second tranche, okay? That they were supposed to. It was in their agreement. Okay? So that was in January. It took me the entire year of struggle and raising money from people, friends and family, etc., to try and make good on that project. I'm extremely happy that all of the Ann Arbor residents wound up getting their solar installed. It was incredibly, incredibly difficult for me. Now, during that whole process, the reason I came up with my ideas was I said, okay, we have equity holders, we have debt holders. Their interests are not aligned, right? The debt holders have secured debt so they could take our assets. The equity holders don't want us to do that, right?
Right.
So I started looking into this new asset class of crypto assets of the blockchain, specifically to see if there was a way to capitalize Geo Stellar and make all this work, even though I was going up against Chris Bancroft. So that's me as a scrappy entrepreneur trying to do well and make things right. Okay? As part of that, I needed psychological separation from Geo Stellar.
Okay.
So I got acceptance into Smart City Works, which is an accelerator. They call themselves an actuator in Ransom, Virginia.
Okay.
Smart City Works has all kinds of companies. They have virtual reality companies, augmented reality companies.
Smart City Works, 3 words, Smart City Works.
Smart City Works, yes. There was a company that had they make roads out of recycled materials, and they're really, I mean, they're better, like they last longer and all that. Augmented reality companies, so you can actually see what a building would look like in a particular area and walk around, those types of things. RFID for managing concrete block, like a bunch of really good ideas, and that's what they were doing. So I participated in that. And it gave me a bunch of ideas, right? I'm an entrepreneur. And I like the jokes that people made, like, what exactly are you criticizing me for, being an entrepreneur? Which is, if I was in Silicon Valley, that's one of the interesting things is, failure is actually
Yeah, I wasn't
treasured.
criticizing.
You fail fast. That's what they say, is fail fast. And everyone gets second chance and all that.
I wasn't criticizing you for being a failure. Or I wasn't criticizing you for the businesses having failed. And it did come across that way. But what I was getting
and
to
some of them
was,
didn't fail. That's the other point.
True.
Is that, the point for me was I was trying to build them here, right? Every single time I had investors who were trying to move them other places, right? So that's part of this whole concept of crowd investing. And the concept of crowd investing is that people can invest in what they care about, right? So all of a sudden you don't have billionaires just saying, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Sure.
The first company, GE Capital, Ultraprise, it's the second company, they would come out for board meetings and actually complain about getting car sick, in their black town cars coming out from Delaware from the Jefferson County roads, right? That's what I've been fighting all of these years, right? And when I have to lay somebody off, or when something doesn't happen that I think is going to happen, like when I have a commitment from an investor, and that's what happened in this place. I had a document that said 4 tranches of $4 million. When I think the second tranche is coming on this date, and I've hired someone who is my friend, that is an incredible psychological toll on both of us. You never want that to happen. What's great is, and someone I would like you to talk to, is Drew Tabb, because he understands what they call the moto coaster. That was something given, Nancy Valjean gave me that nickname, moto coaster, because of the ride. You have to understand, if you're going to partner with me, there's going to be a ride. Drew Tabb has a great job right now at the Library Corp. Why does he have a job at the Library Corp? When he was incredibly young, still in college, right out of college, he got a job with me, right? He learned a hell of a lot. He then got another job with me, learn more. So there's some people who are going to be up for startups, right? There's some people who would not be, should not join startups, and should know, and I hope I always convey this to them, here is what is happening, okay? Here is when this next tranche comes in. Here's why I think there is a reasonable chance that this is going to happen. That in no case should anyone consider joining a startup the same as holding a federal job, or holding this job, or holding that job.
Well, going back to...
So the idea. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, the idea, the alternative JCDA, or however that's...
So the first concept, so these are two totally different things. So when I thought about the resistance in DC, right? You sort of had all these Twitter accounts, like, you know, alt NOAA and alt National Park Service and all that. And it was sort of funny for everybody, you know, that like ultimately, and it was because like the National Park Service would do a tweet and Trump would shut them down, right? Because they had power. And what was showing was that administration cared about power more than they cared about anything else.
Sure.
Right? They so they were shutting down all these modes of communication. So I just set up a Twitter account, alt JCDA. I just thought that was going to be funny, and I was going to run, you know, the alt JCDA Twitter account. So then, as things started getting, as Dan Casto and I don't even remember the name of the stupid guy with a cowboy hat, who's on the JCDA. So they started attacking me. One of them called me the Bernie Madoff of Shepherdstown and then just started calling me Bernie, right? So they're public officials, right? They have a different responsibility to their constituents than I have. I don't have any responsibility to anybody except for my friends, my family, and, you know, the responsibilities I choose to take on.
Got ya.
Right? So, now I don't even remember where I was going. Okay, so I saw these practices which are fundamentally corrupt, okay? When, again, it becomes ad hominem attacks. And that's why, and I hope you put this quote in, why I think the practice of Jefferson's spirit of buying into the ad hominem fallacy, that any statement from a person is somehow should be questioned based on some characteristic or past or whatever of that person is a logical fallacy. I was a Yale philosophy major. If there's one thing I understand is logic. What I wish they gave every public official is Spinoza's ethics. I think, you know, I love the Constitution. I mean, these guys like Ray Bruning, he talks about the Constitution all the time, right? He doesn't understand that the right to due process is in 2 articles. One of those specifically talks about the state, not the federal government in due process, right? And yet, the JCDA takes his wife, there's all this stuff in our West Virginia Code about nepotism, takes a public official on the record and appoints the JCDA the wife of that public official, where they had 3 good candidates. She was probably the least qualified. I don't know, that's a judgment. But is that not insanely suspect? So doesn't it seem odd that 2 of the public officials are openly attacking me for something that has nothing to do with any of this, instead of answering my legitimate concerns about how this happened?
Right.
So the question is, was he calling me Bernie Madoff? Was that an anti-Semitic dog whistle? That's a reasonable question. I hope you call him. I'll send you the screen captures.
No, you're saying Dan Casto said that?
No, it's the other guy, the stupid guy with the cowboy hat. I'll look it up. I'll send you the screen caps, okay? You know, but I think you should ask him why he called me the Bernie Madoff, you know, and ask him if that was anti-Semitism. Now I think you should ask people about him. So I have a friend, I have to ask him before you can talk to him on the record, who has a development, he has property right by the river.
What's up, David?
Good stuff, Eric. Hey. Really important property, like some of the last 60 acres that exists, you know, along the river. So he was looking for people who would help him develop it in a really low impact way. He had all these meetings with community, could we all buy in, early and do something this way? Like he was looking for solutions. And this guy, Steve something.
The guy on the JCDA,
on the JCDA.
Stollifer. Steve Stollifer?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay.
Steve Stollifer. Asked, was looking at putting something like 800 units on this property. Like, so this is somebody, okay, he's part of the JCDA, he's a real estate developer, who, in my mind, he's part of, I think, Radio Free Jefferson County put something out there that showed that he was part of a group that invited, who's that guy? Who invited the Eastern European guy who was part of the Trump administration.
Yeah, I know who you mean.
Yeah. Again, radical right wing, brought him to Jefferson County to speak. Now, he is on the JCDA.
Sebastian.
Yeah.
Zorka.
Or
Yeah,
you know who I mean.
I do. You're saying though that was this guy that wanted to develop
Right.
the river.
Right.
That's not who's that person? Do you remember?
He's the same. No,
That's Stollifer?
Stollifer, yes. Brings these people in, right? So, and again, this is all part of, like, it's not paranoia, it's not unreasonable to say there are people, Ray is one of them, Dan Casto is another, and Stollifer is another, who are partisan, right? Mm-hmm. Dan, and I have screen caps of this, saying early on in this process, complaining about liberal environmentalists. So he puts on his feed, liberal environmentalists are doing this, liberal environmentalists are doing that, right? He is a public official. I've been texting him, like I can send you my text messages with him, saying to him, why are you doing it this way? Like, as a public official, shouldn't you just be like saying, I appreciate your legitimate concerns, I'm going to look into this?
Was he wasn't calling you necessarily?
No, this was
just
this,
general.
So Dan is careful with me because we have a previous business relationship, right? So he doesn't, I mean, he has done, so instead, like, he's done other things that are false and has not retracted them. So he picks up, for example, on this whole thing, like, again, instead of attacking me ad hominem, what he did was, when I published the Forbes article, he put out a statement saying Forbes has no editorial control over these types of contributors, right? Here's an article about how to contribute for Forbes, right? I wrote under that, that article was from here. Here's a newer article that said, and that was not a Forbes article. That was some guy on some marketing blog saying how to become a Forbes contributor, right? Forbes put out a statement saying we are reducing our number of contributors, okay? We're going to pay every contributor, and we're going to, they have the same editorial control that our staff writers do, right? This was before I wrote for Forbes. The editors grilled me as I was writing this, right? When Rockwool would complain, they would send the complaints to me and say, can you address these, right? One of those was, why are they calling us toxic, okay? I went to one of my friends who is a legal assistant and say, hey, how do I support the claim this is toxic? And he said, Toxic Substances Act. These are toxic. If they tell you that you can't say they're toxic, then so the Forbes supported me. So there was a process, and they try to, instead of arguing that they're not toxic because they can't, they attacked me as a person, and that is an article.
So I think maybe yesterday in the conversation you mentioned something about, you were doing this at a time when you could be focusing on your next business. And tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, so, I'm trying to get Indico off the ground. So Indico is a platform for security tokens, okay? I'm going out, I'm leading the security token panel, security token technology panel at the largest and most prestigious industry trade show. That is Tuesday.
In California?
Yes. I was supposed to actually go out Thursday because there was another event. It's called Blockchain Week in LA. So there were a bunch of events. I was going to be out there the whole time. I stayed here first for the meeting with Senator Manchin's staff. As things accelerated, I was like, I'm just going to stay and just basically fly in for my panel and come back. Because this, to me, protecting my home and my county and my family is much more important than my business. I really have pretty much put that on hold. Whenever Monica comes into my office and sees Rockwool stuff on my computer, she's like, we got to pay for Daisy's college somehow. So that is mostly on hold. I have to make a living, so I can't, and I have to fight these guys, and it's incredibly expensive.
Fight these guys? You mean Rockwool?
No. Fight. So Nick Bancroft is backing a lawsuit against me in Berkeley County Court. Me personally, and my real estate company. Okay. So all these people are talking about pointing to, this bankruptcy, which they drove me purposefully. They threatened to destroy me personally and said if I don't do what they want me to do, they're going to destroy me personally.
Wow.
Okay? So you can see why this is emotional for me.
Sure.
So essentially, we're just very fortunate that our first two children went to school for free in WVU on academic scholarships and other scholarships. And hopefully Daisy will be able to get scholarships because we have been destroyed financially by Chris Bancroft and John Greer and Wiki Elephant of Matador County.
And it's something that is ongoing, it's not over?
Oh no, it's going to go on for years. We're trying to get a jury trial. They're absolutely determined to destroy me. And one thing I put in there, it was because I called him out on being a racist.
You
I
think
actually
that's
have
why?
I don't think it. He told me. When we had a private conversation, I so wish I had recorded it. It was in D.C. and there's one-party consent. But he said to me, I said, I do have a witness, and it's going to come up in the trial. Actually, I can send you the complaints. I put it all in, all of this stuff is, it's public record, I think, but I don't even know how people get it. But I'll send you I'll send you with it. You can report what's on the record. It shows what they said, what they did, but they are literally trying to destroy me personally.
Wow.
So the way I look at it, I'm fighting a three-front war. I'm fighting Rockwool. I'm fighting a billionaire. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay for my daughter's college next year.
Daisy's your youngest?
Yes.
Of three? Oh, gosh. Of those three, I mean, they're all pretty, everything's imminent. Everything's happening now, and you've got to be there for all three of them, right?
Yep.
Wow.
It's a good thing. One of the things I'm proud of myself of, I have a very high capacity for work.
It's coming in handy.
Yep.
Well, do you think that the Indico model is something that will be helpful in Rockwool, or?
No, see, and this is the other thing. I can't mix different things, right?
Okay.
So Indico has always stayed as Indico, right? I really see, one of the things, like I see Scott, the mayor of Charleston.
Rogers.
Scott Rogers. Like he posts on Twitter, this local business is trying to raise money on GoFundMe. Black Dog Coffee was trying to raise money on GoFundMe. Like to me, that's tragic. People are doing their, like that's not how it should be. Like the goal of Indico was to get, instead of doing it there, like what if those businesses said to their customers, hey, you can own a part of my business. Like you're gonna get, I'm gonna distribute to all of my customers 60% of all the profits, okay, for 10 years if you get us through this tight point, instead of trying to go to the bank, instead of doing GoFundMe or whatever. That's what Indico is for, okay? It's not for anything else. Like that's what it's for. Any company can do it. So where I started, it was actually a really interesting conversation with Melissa Hines, who I hope you also talked to in all this. She was sending me really funny messages with things like, God, you're an entrepreneur. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. You're living the dream. And I was like, if you had any idea, and then, she would say things like, well, if this happens, at least you're a millionaire and, you can move easily, and, so people have this perception, right, that somehow other people didn't do well in all this and somehow I got away with money, right? So people have all these just odd perceptions. So my thought of moving it from alt JCDA to a commercial enterprise, which I am not going to make money on.
Okay.
We had, I don't remember if it was the first or second meeting, but Joy Bridie had like these amazing ideas for what could be done in that was supposed to be a maker space, right? The special district industrial.
Okay.
What could be done? They were just brilliant ideas about different crafts and, large scale and, 3D printing and all that stuff. Bradley Sanders is trying to get something working with, he's working with Keir Knoll, something working with a new type of fire, like whatever those furnaces are, wood burning stove that doesn't emit pollution. So what I started thinking was, could I take all of my scars and lessons learned and get all of these people, and I just call them co-founders, right? And I got 2 people to agree to be officers so that when it's time, we can file paperwork and raise money. And one of those people who's been volunteering for everything, she happens to be right now a stay-at-home mom. Once we do have money, it's possible we can hire somebody. And what's so interesting, and she would be the first one who would be hired. And it's all just conversations that we're all having. This is how startups happen. Like I vividly remember my first Geo Stellar meeting at Mellow Moods, with Jeremy Dobransky, who I'd worked with since 1998, with Butch Deal, who I've worked with since 1993, with Brayton Daw, who I've worked with since 1999, right? So there's this ethos among entrepreneurs, co-founders, this is how it happens. Like, oh, we have an idea, we can solve a problem. So wouldn't it be freaking amazing if Smart Growth Syndicate worked and a bunch of people got jobs? And so Patsy Nolan, to have the audacity to say to Jefferson Vision, testifying, are you being paid? Mm-hmm. Are you taking anything, from what people are contributing? Like, you're a paid protester, whatever it is. Why are these same hyper-capitalists criticizing people in the first place for real money? There's this thing, one of my business coaches who I actually met in Silicon Valley uses the term money shadows. Like, people don't know how to deal with money. Money's one of the three things: sex, politics, and money, and faith. People, in polite, it's hard at dinner, to talk about politics, your religion, money. Like, I don't know how much you make. You don't know how much I make. I mean, it's just public officials. It's important. But bringing up the money question is something, one of the reasons I wanted to do this is to bring transparency into the money. And that's what's so great about the blockchain. Everybody knows where the money is.
Right.
Because it's public, it's a public ledger. Like, you can't cheat it, right?
Well, and let me ask you this. So you're dealing with all this stuff, but if you daydream about a way that there's a solution, you feel like it is possible for Rockwool to end up somewhere where it's happy and it's doing its thing, and some people somewhere have jobs that pay more than working at McDonald's.
Exactly.
Jefferson County has its clean air, clean water, underground karst, everything's good there. The community's been energized and comes together. Right,
that's my dream, and I believe that what we're starting. And I actually sat down. I had a meeting yesterday, 1 p.m. with Jefferson Vision, and I told them I wanted them to know that I was doing this other thing. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with them. I wasn't trying to compete with them. Some people are concerned. Wow, is David going to do his own thing? Does he have a problem with Jefferson Vision doing? I think those guys are the most amazing leaders. Like, I walked in, I don't even know if they want this in the press, but I'm going to say it. I walked in for my meeting, they were finishing up a leadership training center. Somebody from the NCTC was just as a volunteer doing leadership training these people. I could see it was on the wall. I was like, I was so happy because I know how passionate they are, and I know how challenges get. They're going to have to step up their game, right? I'm going to bring this whole other front in the war, but what I think is it's about bringing what comes next, right? So Beverly Ross, who's been showing up to all the meetings, okay? She said to me at the last Smart Growth Syndicate meeting, mm-hmm. She said to me, I'm a Republican. You know why I like you? You're like Trump. You don't take any shit. You do, you're out there. And I said, well, I'd rather you compared me to Abby Hoffman, but, I get what you're saying. But, so that's the thing. That's why, people don't know. I mean, you're seeing, the emotional, vulnerable side of me, but it's actually, it's a benefit to me for people to think of me as, and my old soccer coach used to call me Daredevil because I was the man without fear. I just always went head first into any situation, and I am like that. I mean, I pretty much was born without the fear gene, which scared my mom to death. But that's part of it. But I really think that with this actual plan, and with me, and I am not going to have, and that's the cool thing is, this company, which is going to be a company, and we're still going through all the setup process and distributing all that. Because I have this other company that's doing filings with the SEC, mm-hmm. I cannot have any control of. So Indico and Smart Growth Syndicate have to be separate. all I want to do is
putting people together.
I'm putting them together. I'm advising them. I'm giving them as much information as they can for 3 reasons. Because they are my dear friends, okay? Because I want our county to have the smart type of growth that it can. And because I think this could help stop Rockwool, because it's a negotiated solution that involves all the parties and could involve the development office. You know, they could say, okay, well, we're going to transfer this $2.2 million, forgivable loan to the Smart Growth Syndicate.
Sure.
Right? And then that could pay, and then, I don't know if Melissa wants to quit her job as, with the city of Ransom, but then she could come on full time. She could be an entrepreneur like she always wanted to, right?
Right.
Joy Bridey could set up her shop within this, right? To me, this is like the most beautiful dream I could ask for. The other thing that what I believe everybody wants in this county, more than anything else, is for our children and our grandchildren to be near us. I get the feels every time.
I mean, that is really beautiful.
Zoe, I love Zoe. She's in Annapolis, and we see her sometimes. But just imagine if there was a mixed-use community where she could come and practice music therapy, have her private practice, go out to the schools.
Right.
With people there.
But you feel like, this is a dream, but at the same time, you feel like this could
fucking pull this off.
Okay. Wow. I mean, you kind of, Geo Stellar was a huge good thing for a long time.
Exactly. And, and that's the interesting thing about each of the companies. Every time, so Ultraprize, we were getting ready to go public. Like we had, in the beginning, it was a great business. Like Husky Labs, we had like $7 million in annual revenue. We had a bunch of people. It was fine. I had this idea. Everybody else was, raising venture capital, going public. I had this idea, we're going to go do that, right? So we got money from GE Capital. We got money from Citigroup and all this. At a certain point, the bubble burst and they said, we don't want to be in these companies, okay? We don't want to be in startups. Startups aren't cool anymore. Wow. They forced a merger with a Southern California company, right? If they hadn't done that, Ultraprize could have been a great success. There's no reason. Everybody loved it. We had customers, right? Even before they did that, they moved. We had 120 people in Shepherdstown. They moved half to Frederick and half to Northern Virginia. Like, how stupid is that? That increased our costs. I had a guy sitting there in a board meeting say, you're not a player if you're not burning $1 million a month, right? Those are the people who are on my board, okay? The second company, so I learned something. So it was merged with a Southern California company. I left. We went to Disney World, my first vacation ever, and I came up with the idea for a butterfly net, which became Gaindeal, right? There, I was 100% fired because I would not move the company to California.
Wow.
Mark Wirt and I, who was the CTO, actually went and looked at houses throughout Silicon Valley. We went to Woodside, we went to all these places. We came back, we talked about it, and we said, we just can't do it. We can't move our family. And the CEO, this guy, Colin Savage, Monica calls him the Savage Colon, from a $1 billion fund, Worldview Technology Partners. He said, you need to be here because we need to drive by at night and see the cars are still in the parking lot. He said he would call me, 8 o'clock in the evening my time, 5 o'clock his time, maybe it was, 7:30, so he was still at work. Call me on my home number and say, what are you doing at home? I'm having dinner, our entrepreneurs don't do that. He was calling us a lifestyle company, okay? He wanted his buddy at Disney to be the CEO. This is how they work, okay? So I learned those two things. I'm like, I'm not going to do another company. Didn't have an idea for another company for a while. I commuted to Maine. I had a team I worked for, I worked for the governor. I worked for
Manchin.
Yeah, I worked for Manchin. I worked for, what do you call it, the NTTC. I certainly have some stories about that, if anyone ever did journalism on what was going on up there. I did work, I advised a bunch of startups. I commuted to Chicago. Suddenly I had this idea for Geo Stellar. I ramped it up just like I knew how to do these companies. It would have, we had bankers who were trying to raise $40 million for us. Mm-hmm. The bankers brought in these guys and they said, this is what they're like. And I said, yeah, but you're raising $40 million. All we need is a little bit of time to get that and to show the growth rates, and we were doing it all this way. And they just fucked us because, and literally, I'll send you this. You'll see that none of this is rational. Like, that's what I realized. And so I said, okay, so what am I going to do next? I said, I'm going to do something. This is how entrepreneurs work. It's like, it's all about what problem I get up. I'm going to solve the problem of entrepreneurs like me getting fucked over. Okay. Right? Mm-hmm. So that is why I started Indico. Then, when all my friends and neighbors are getting fucked over here, I say, okay, let me use this platform to unfuck the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you, in the Gazette column, and maybe in the Forbes piece, how are you described? Just in the Gazette, I want to say none of your business background is in there at all. It's just you live in Shepherdstown.
Well, I sent to them my bio. But they didn't put it. I don't know what they publish or not.
And the same with Forbes? Or did they
Forbes,
go into...
No, Forbes, they have my bio is on Forbes. So it says at the bottom
what you're doing now and all that.
Yeah. So, sure.
Yeah, I just think
it's the reason, the reason I write what I write for Forbes is because I was in the solar industry, and they brought me in to do energy, and I never would have written anything for Forbes about this, except I was
you already had that relationship.
Right. No, it was because I was sitting there and I heard Tracy Cannon talk about the pipeline, and I suddenly thought, hey, I have an energy column for Forbes. This is actually interesting. And I actually literally, before I was actually part of the movement, I had never gone to a meeting. I didn't even consider myself anti-rock. I didn't know anything, right? I was sitting here, I heard Tracy say some things about the pipeline feeding Rockville. And I thought, hey, that's interesting. I wrote this first article, learned a little bit more about it. And then as I started learning more, I called somebody who talked to me off the record because he's a lawyer in a law firm that did some work for Rockville, not the main thing. And he started pointing things to me. He said, hey, look at the pipe stem zoning, and he said, look at this and look at that. And I was like, I call him my deep throat, and then I called other people and started finding out more stuff. And I was like, holy cow, but, I used to write for Entrepreneur because of Entrepreneur. And the thing is, I'm out front. I share my, I've been waiting to write the article. My lawyer told me not to write an article about the meltdown at Geo Stellar just because he doesn't want, if I write it, then, it'll come up in court and they could sue me for defamation or whatever.
They would just complicate things.
It would just complicate things. So that's the only reason I haven't written about about that. But
Okay.
I think these things are interesting to me. I'm an open book. Like, I don't, that's a good thing. That's what's nice about being a private citizen. Like, what I don't have anything to lose. Like, I haven't taken an oath, right? I know I don't lie. That's good enough for me. If somebody can catch me in a falsehood, the fact that you describe it as hyperbole, probably, but that's still not.
It's a judgment.
It's a judgment. It's.
Yeah, I see what you're saying about you feel like everything in your column, it might sound over the top, but you can back it up when you look at Thrasher and the governor and the whole picture.
Yeah. It's a legitimate concern. It's not a wild conspiracy. It's not QAnon, right? I don't think that Mueller and Trump are on the same side, right? And the fact that he drank Fiji water awkward was because Fiji is part of a child prostitution distribution ring, like, right? But that's what to me, that's conspiracy paranoia, right?
Well, I mean, this has given me a lot of good new information and ideas, and I know some of what you had in the presentation to Manchin, but not all of it. If you could share with it, that would be terrific. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very glad we could sit down and talk.
And I hope you also noticed that I never went into ad hominems with you. Like, I really did try and bring up what I really considered legitimate issues with your coverage. And my real hope is, I think the local press is absolutely critical in all of this, and I really, really, really want you to succeed. Right?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not easy, and I wish all the time that, the Spirit's been around for a long time, but didn't really cover news at all until, 2012. I wish, the paper had been, like the Gazette, a voice all these years for all kinds of things, and had that trust built up with people. But you have to deal with things as they
There's
are
still plenty
and try
of time. What I would just really recommend is that you do one article that really states, or maybe make an opinion. You could say, in the past, I thought that these concerns were overblown. Now I really see the way I would like to say it. Okay, and this is my ask. I consider Rockwool an existential threat to the county, meaning the real character of the county as we know it. And I would like a statement that is a legitimate concern because of our unique geography, our weather patterns, our current economy, and the toxins that are used on site and that are released into the atmosphere. That it makes it a legitimate concern.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see.
The people are. It is actually rational to consider moving.
Sure.
Not hysterical.
Yeah, I do see where you're coming. Yeah, and I always appreciate feedback. The use of the term hysterical, hysteria. I worked very hard to stay away from sexist language, and I did know the root of the word, but I did not consider it a sexist term. And the people speaking out, like whenever anybody has something to say that helps you think about things in a new way, it's helpful. So, it's all been good. And,
yeah, it turned us into a positive.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. Well, thank you again for your time. It's great to talk with you.